some time ago, I stumbled across a short little book at one thrift store or another, which, as it happens, is my main source of books. Normally, I don't think I would have gotten it, but there's one thing about it that really piqued my interest. This book is titled, It's Never Too Late, a literary project by the inmates of Stillwater and Shakopee prisons. Stillwater and Shakopee are cities in my own state. Shakopee was actually the city I was in at the time I came across this book. Of course, I had to take a look at it. What's even more interesting is that this isn't available pretty much anywhere online. Hello, and welcome back to H8 Book Reviews. This small little thing, small enough to read in probably 2 hours, if that, has no ISBN number that I can find. No author. There's a single individual who was the primary project coordinator and the publisher, and she has published other books, but this wasn't written by her. It is a collection of stories and poems written by the prisoners of these cities for the purpose of telling people how they got there, why prison is miserable, and hoping to convince people on that path to never wind up there. To fix their lives before they find out what it's truly like in person. Stories, poems, and art too, I should say. I'd say roughly 30 out of the 85 pages, with another 8 for the introduction, have works of art created by the inmates featured, including both covers. One of my favorite pieces is on page 66. Ironic, considering the subject matter. Because this is a matter of prison, I've also decided to make a video over on H8 politics, link in the description and probably in the corner somewhere, all about criminal justice and the types and forms it takes. If you're interested in that, make sure to go check it out. Also, this book, it says in the introduction, is free to whomever wants a copy because it was made possible through a grant from Education Minnesota and a matching donation from David Fix, who believes in what this book has to offer. And that's super cool. I love projects like that, and I love free and flowing access to information and stories and art. If you would like this for yourself, I will explain more in detail how to get your hands on it at the end. Be warned, it's in a very weird place, despite its goal. Before that, though, I have to actually review the thing, so let's get into it. From a purely literary perspective, there is simply not much for me to say about this book. That isn't to say it's boring or bad writing. Well, maybe it is a little. I just recognize that it isn't that sort of project. But I read it, so I'm here reviewing it anyway. I also recognize that I am most definitely not the target audience of this book. See, it is primarily an artistic project not just by inmates, but attempting to convince troubled youth, or just troubled anyone, away from crimes and drugs so that they don't become inmates. I don't particularly see myself on that path, or at least, if I am, I didn't exactly get anything I didn't already know, so I'm still not the target audience. The primary reason I have this book at all was because it was by inmates in Minnesota, my home state. I also have it because I think it has intrinsic artistic worth and because I am invested in politics, but those are more secondary. But there are interesting literary elements that exist in this because of its unique creation and aim. It is, naturally, very jumbled. It mixes short stories, narratives, and poetry. And when I say short stories, I mean a single page short. One entry may be talking about the sheer magnitude of the loneliness of prison, while the next is a heartfelt plea for kids to stay away from marijuana, and the next is a story of a woman who could have lived a good life, but got addicted to crack and died. It is an asynchronous reading experience, which I could absolutely produce some post hoc justification about how that symbolically represents the asynchronous reality of crime, drugs, and prison life, but I really don't think that was ever intentional. Though the art primarily styled as collages may actually bear some credence for that, which there's a lot of art in here, actually about one painting every other page. Let me try and skip through some of it if you can see that. It is in black and white, unfortunately. Most of it is collages, but there are also a lot of paintings and portraits. And I believe that most, if not all, of them were also made by the inmates, several also presenting their writing in its collection. Another literary element is that it's very direct. There's not much room for metaphor. Even the poetry, which one might naturally assume is primarily symbolic, is often direct and explicit. This could be for several reasons, probably a combination of them all, but I don't really have anything to go off of, just speculation. It could be that this is an explicit choice on the part of the authors and the editors, catering to who the target audience is. At the risk of being a little cynical and maybe even a little mean, the kids about to be convicted felons usually aren't the type to read much. So being as direct about what they're trying to say, prison bad, violence bad, drugs will ruin your life, is more important, as it is more likely to get through than something laden with metaphor. Or it could be that it was just out of necessity of how each entry was, and that length may also be for stylized or editorialized reason. Again, perhaps because of the demographic aim, or maybe just so more voices can be given at a time. Thirdly, it might also just be that none of these people are really practiced writers or poets, at least not at the time this project was conducted. Imagery is something generally learned. Anyone can pick up a pen, but not everyone can make that pen live. Which again, was not to say that the writing was bad. It wasn't particularly good either, though. It was so-so, maybe a little below average in terms of my own preferences. Not to imply mine here is much better either. It really was just people telling others of their pain, their life, and their regret. There's beauty in that, a lot of beauty, to open your heart up to the world, so that even in the confines of prison, others, even strangers, may yet hear you, and that, just for a moment, so long as the book is open, maybe you aren't so alone after all. Despite that, its emotional impact can often be stunted by its brevity. A dozen life stories explaining how someone wound their way to committing some crime or another sort of lessens the actual impact of the purported horror of prison. With only a page or two to work with, explaining your path and your story and only leaving the last few lines to explain the pain associated with prison life, in whatever form that pain comes in for that individual, diminishes the return of the intended lesson, which is that prison is absolutely horrible and dehumanizes everyone within its confines. Certainly, elaborating on that path that led to that destination is very important so that others may see it in themselves and understand that that may one day be them. But the balance was overwhelmingly in favor of the path rather than the destination, to the detriment of both the message and the reading experience. It is further detracted by just how often this repeats. There are, of course, so many different stories that hearing what pretty much amounts to the same story again and again, that being drugs and crime and a poor home life with some small changes of detail, stifles the raw emotionality that is supposed to be extracted. No individual story is so stuffed that cannot be moving, but the collection of so many all at once in such a short period of time and space is. Though not every section is like that. There is a decent selection of relatively unique works or stories or perspectives, such as a man who by all accounts had it made and still ended up choosing drugs over a healthy life, or a woman who exclusively focused on the sheer joy of seeing her children, only to then experience the soul-shaking sorrow of knowing it'll be months until the next visit. There's also two lines that in particular stood out to me, such as, "It's often said that you are what you eat. It can also be said that you are what you teach." Or even this line here from the introduction. "This book is that turning back for some of these inmates. This book can also be a turning back point for whomever reads it and chooses to take heed to what these inmates have to say. They did not write these stories for fame or fortune, because they won't get either." From less of a writing perspective and more of a political or just the perspective of the aim of the book, there's also a decent amount of good takeaways to be gleaned about prison and prison life. Elements either rarely discussed in other media, or that can't really be hammered home enough. To go over them, Geraldine Carlton, in her story A Lesson Well Learned, expressed how the reason it took until having grandchildren to get her act in order, rather than children, was that she could control her children's lives, but her daughter controls her grandchildren's. Dominic Maines, in his second poem here fittingly titled A Second Poem, wrote about how, after 12 years of being stuck in a place like prison, without proper socialization, where the only emotions you're allowed to express are anger and hatred, how, once he's on the outside, can he hope to have proper and healthy relationships? This especially struck me as important because, with my background in politics, I know that healthy social relationships are one of the single most important factors towards preventing crime and drug use and other social ills. There's Brandon Bell in From the Cradle to the Grave. He wrote, "I feel guilt and shame for the harm I have caused other people. It has all come back on me and doesn't feel very good. I'm doing over 29 years for murder. It was due to a family member who was real close to me. He was killed for something someone else did. In actuality, it was for nothing." There's Rebecca Coleman writing Last Times, which is the story about the pain of seeing your children only so seldomly, saying that she will sit and wait for the sadness to go away, even though it never does. That this is a last time that never goes away. Keeping It Real by Baton Prince Phillips, who unfortunately is not the actual British monarch, though that would be pretty funny, touched on how you can't merely teach children. You need to show them. Show them by an example. If you want your children to lead a good life, you yourself must also live one. He was also the one who wrote, "You are what you teach," so double props to him. The most important message I got from this book was something of a different variety. I'll read this paragraph out as well, written by Tyrone Jones in Unforgotten Memories. He says, "In here, it's just as bad as the outside. For those people who think they are alright because they believe in the myth, 3 hots and a cot, they don't realize that they need just as much money in here to survive. Nothing changes. The ones with money live well, while those without struggle to buy a bar of soap and deodorant. There is really no difference. Some live penitentiary-rich lives, and others live just as poor as they ever did." This, I would argue, is perhaps the single most important lesson that any reader, whether on the fast track to the same place or a more removed observer, such as hopefully you and I, can understand. It is important precisely because it is never really mentioned anywhere else, never explained to those of us on the outside that life in prison doesn't change, that it's not a free ride, and because it, more than anything else, really gives a perspective that simple observation cannot. I hate to say it, but the violent youth won't really be swayed by examples of prison violence. But they might, just might, be swayed by recognition that there is nothing for them there. That whatever their life is here, now, it will likely be just the same. If you're trying to escape that life, why run to it? Because of these glimmering diamonds in the rough, I am of the opinion that this book has significantly more political merit than literary merit. Despite a few oddities that I also don't really know how to explain, like weed being demonized at the same level as cocaine in at least one story, which is a generally false narrative, there's a lot we can learn from these inmates and their art, both of the image and the written word, on a political level. There are important lessons to educate the youth by and hopefully move towards a more just society. Not only for the inmates, but also to prevent people from becoming inmates. That is the whole point, I suppose. But as a book itself, there's unfortunately just not much going for it. The concept is phenomenal, but the execution was severely lacking. If it had allowed itself more room, probably a lot more room, it could have salvaged a lot. But as it is now, there is a lot that weighs down on the reading experience. A quick read is not always a good read. Still, like I've said, it's not bad either. It's just that what little space it had, it used poorly. For that, I will give it a 4 out of 10, a perfectly just below average reading experience. Alas, remember that is not to say anything on its value. I believe this book is valuable, highly so, and if the chance to ever read it comes by, I recommend taking it. But how do you actually do that? I promise to answer that. Well, I'm honestly not sure if you do. It does exist on Amazon. There's actually 2 versions available, both of which are linked down below. However, I'm not so sure how trustworthy they are. The more seemingly legit of the 2 is provided first, the one I'm more wary of second. Additionally, the second link says currently unavailable, and the first costs $5.50. I'm also unable to find it on Anna's Archive, shockingly enough. I do not know how to actually provide access to this book for free, which entirely goes against its purpose. So I've actually emailed the Stillwater Correctional Facility asking if there's anyone I could speak to about the project. I await a response. Assuming I get correspondence with anyone, I'd like to ask about how to make it more available to people. I will provide updates to this in the pinned comment below. Also, sometime in the near future, I will also be personally working on uploading this book to the archive. When it is available, I will link it in the description, and similarly update my progress in the comments. So, this should be fun, and honestly I'm pretty glad for this opportunity to do all this cool stuff. If you would like to see me do more cool stuff and review even more weird and niche books, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because I'll be back next week. Hopefully. I guess you never know. I might end up in prison.
Mom, this is not mine. Mom, this is mine. Don't with the computer.
Yeah, we might be breaking and entering your home right now, so you better push those buttons. I can see you. I can see you, actually. And this has been H8 Book Reviews. Never stop reading.
Brought to you by Taco Bell.